Hello, everyone, and welcome back to CLI's Legal GenAI Conversations Series. In this series, we'll be discussing how generative AI is impacting the legal ecosystem way beyond the tech. In each session, we're tackling one area of legal business or practice that's been impacted by GenAI, and we're asking legal thought leaders and doers around the world how they are managing the unforeseen, the challenges and the opportunities, and what they've learned along the way. And that brings us to this episode. Every aspect of legal practice is transforming before our eyes, with AI as a catalyst and the enabler. It's a challenging time for law firm leaders. It's definitely not a role for the faint-hearted, and we're going to be discussing all of that today in this session on legal leaders in the AI era. Are we there yet? And we're going to be figuring out also how to get from here to there with the help of these fabulous panelists. So let me introduce them to you. Simon Newcomb, who is a partner at Clayton Utz, Dan Prieto, who is the Chief Executive Partner at Lander and Rogers, and Prue Tyler, who's the founder and director of Shift Advisory Limited. Simon, Dan, and Prue, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I want to kick off with a little bit about you, because I think for many leaders, whether in law firms or otherwise, how they lead is often intricately tied to who they are. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, but also about your role, and particularly what's got you interested and continues to excite you about the leadership part of what you do in your firm. And Prue, I'm going to direct this question to you first. Welcome.
Thanks, Terry, and thanks for having me today. So when I established Shift, I had a vision for a different type of a law firm. So I guess my leadership style is linked to trying to do things a bit differently, and just trying to challenge the norms a little bit too around how the legal profession operates and how we can keep awesome lawyers engaged but on their terms. So my vision for Shift was to create a community for lawyers who want to work differently, but for clients to be able to access amazing senior top-notch in-house lawyers who can get stuff done and solve their problems. So our value set was around authenticity and courage, around when I first set this up, and it was really out of my own experience when I had my 3 kids and I wasn't quite sure where I fitted that drove me to create Shift. So a lot of what I do is actually encouraging our people to lead authentically also, but also just to be brave around working in a part-time or flexible way, and just staying true to what they want to do on that basis. So our leadership is about encouraging an inclusive, purpose-driven and forward-thinking kind of culture. So quite passionate about breaking down traditional legal structures and creating new opportunities for our lawyers that might otherwise not have a home, I guess. And so quite complementary to the bigger law firms and the in-house teams as well. So we have flexibility at our core, allowing legal and compliance experts, many of whom are parents, to choose when and how much they want to work. And our commitment to the DE&I part is the core of what we do. I think leadership for me is a way to drive meaningful change within the legal profession and other areas of corporate New Zealand as well. And I love my job. I think it's so exciting to be part of enabling lawyers to continue to do this and matching this most excellent talent and specialties with our valued clients. And GenAI and the fast changes we are seeing are really exciting, and I think an opportunity to add value to our clients, but also to tool up our lawyers with education and know-how to make these gains. So yeah, it's me.
Fantastic. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit more, but that kind of leading from the front, I think, particularly as we're looking at such a massive transformation with AI and Gen AI in the industry, is so critically important. So thank you for that and for the firm that you've created. And that takes me to you, Dan, and all the wonderful things that you're now leading at Lander and Rogers.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. So I'm the Chief Executive Partner at Landers. And for those of you who don't know, Lander and Rogers, we're an large Australian commercial law firm. We're independent and we operate nationally from the eastern seaboard, so Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, and we service clients nationally. We have more than 100 partners and around 700 staff. I'm fairly new to the role of Chief Executive Partner. I'm in my 3rd month. Prior to being in this role, I practiced as an employment lawyer and led our firm's national workplace relations and safety team, which comprises about 70 people, and I was in that role for about 9 years. I suppose what motivates me is I'm really passionate about creating an environment where our people can thrive and be their best versions of themselves, because I think that's the best way in which we then provide service to our clients. And Landers has a very strong culture and is renowned sort of in the industry as having pretty low turnover. We keep our people, and that means we can provide consistent advice to our clients. And I think we're well known for being sort of empathetic and humanistic in the way that we approach our client relationships. I think a large part of that is the internal culture that we've been able to cultivate and nurture. Obviously, AI is a significant opportunity and a challenge for all law firms, and I think both an exciting and daunting time to be a leader. It's certainly one of the things that has probably kept me most busy over the first 3 months, is sort of envisaging, what we look like in 2030 and how we go about getting there. So I'm both excited by what it can do for our people and our clients, but also, I do think whenever you go in, and I know we're going to talk a lot about change today, Terry, change creates uncertainty and different people respond in different ways to uncertainty. I think change in particular for lawyers is a challenge. And so leading in that environment and at this time, I think is going to be, not without its challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly when we're seeing that change aspect at a micro and a macro level all happening at the one time.
Yeah.
I know that kind of puts an additional burden in some respects on your shoulders. So yeah, looking forward to getting into that one as well. But wrapping up this first question, Simon, tell us a bit about you and what excites you about leadership at Clayton Utz.
Thanks, Terry. I'm a partner in our technology practice. So my career has been in technology contracts, intellectual property, privacy, data, and cybersecurity. I have a background in technology, so I studied computer science at university and have really put that together with legal qualifications to have a career as an IT lawyer, essentially. I've never left the tech though. I've always kept my hand in as a developer and sort of kept a strong interest in the technology, and that for me has led to sort of gravitating towards tech management roles in the firm as well. For example, I sit on our cybersecurity board, but most recently, in the last few years, I have also had a role as the head of our AI program within the firm. So really, I'm the partner that's responsible for overseeing our strategy, investment, and risk around AI. And that's been an incredibly and continues to be an incredibly exciting role. In terms of some of the things that really excite me about this, I think firstly, the technology and the rate that it's improving, everything from the fundamental research on AI models, as well as the incredible ways that application developers are harnessing it, and specifically in the legal context in legal tech. And secondly, I think the other thing that really excites me is the transformation of legal practice. So fascinating in how we can create incredible opportunities to improve how we work and the benefit that we can bring to clients and staff. Lawyers, I think, have been sort of relatively less impacted by digital disruption for quite a long time. And I think that's just because law is so hard as a tech problem. And AI, particularly large language models, have really changed all of that very suddenly, because so much of law is about the generation and interpretation of language. And now we have these AI models that are actually really good at that. So all of a sudden, there are all these exciting opportunities that have emerged, and there are so many longer term impacts and opportunities to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll keep us all in a job for a very long time, I guess, all of us, including everyone listening today and watching today as well. I wanted to jump into kind of the core of this session in a way, which is leadership in the AI era, as we've called it. And I guess I'm reflecting back slightly to the first session in this series around mindset. And I'm wondering how all of you think about this in terms of your roles and whether or how law firm leaders need to think differently, but also lead differently in an AI era. And I've started to pull some of the threads on that. But Dan, let me address that question to you first, if I may.
Yeah, look, I don't think we necessarily need to think or lead differently. But I think we do need to accept that AI will have a transformative effect on how we practice law. And, in terms of how we then lead, it is, as we've already all said, it is a challenge and an opportunity. And we need to think probably about different segments of the firm. So in terms of our staff, who are, for most of us, really our only asset is our people. And because AI will bring change, we do need to think about what effect that will have on our people. Some will embrace the change and be up for the excitement of AI and how they're going to use it. Others will be terrified of it and perhaps put their heads in the sand and try to pretend it's not going to happen. So we need to make sure that we're bringing all of our people along on the journey. So being adaptable, being flexible, and leading in a way that acknowledges that people will respond to this technology in different ways is going to be important. Education is also going to be important. So I think ensuring that our people have access to the best information and making sure they're informed about the tools that are available and how to use them is going to be important. And being a champion of that as a leader, making sure that people are aware, but also, I suppose, role modeling by learning ourselves is going to be important. Unlike Simon, I don't really come from a tech background, and it's been a bit of a learning curve for me in terms of getting up to speed with what AI is and how it can be used. And I'm not pretending to suggest I'm an expert by any stretch, but for me, that's been stepping out of my comfort zone a little bit into an area where I'm not comfortable because I know that I have to know it and understand it in order to lead our firm. So we also foster a culture of innovation. I think our view is that a lot of the innovation from AI, because it is, once you get to understand it, relatively easy to use, a lot of that innovation will come from the ground up. And so we want to empower our people to innovate at all levels. It won't just be, our leaders who come up with the ideas that will lead to efficiency gains and deliver better service for our clients. So, among other things, we've launched a prize this year for, and put quite a bit of money up for grabs for the team to come up with innovative ways to find efficiencies within their day-to-day life, and we've really pushed the education piece through the firm. Secondly, we obviously need to bring our clients along on the journey. So client leadership is also really important, and I know we'll probably talk about what it means for how we charge and all the rest of it later on. But even just having open dialogue with our clients about how we're using the technology. Clients are also operating at different speeds. So some clients are all in and asking us what efficiency gains we're already generating. Others are telling us that we can't use AI without their express written permission because they're worried about data security, quite understandably. So we're in a bit of a two-speed economy with our clients as well about how we track, and so having open dialogue, discussions with them on an ongoing basis is really important. And then finally, obviously, there's a whole raft of ethical and compliance issues. Some of those go to data security, which I've just touched on, but making sure that we continue to operate in an ethical way. And have all the relevant safeguards up to make sure that we're compliant. The New South Wales Supreme Court has recently issued a practice note about the use of AI for preparing affidavits. There are other courts issuing different mandates, and there will be more regulation coming in this space. So just staying on top of that as well is a challenge in and of itself. So look, I don't think that means that we need to lead differently or think differently, but it does give rise to a whole range of issues that we do need to think about.
Yeah. But I mean, of all of the many things that you said there, Dan, I'd like to just underscore one thing, and that is that just the importance of engagement of the entire firm, that it's not a top-down or bottom-up situation. It really is getting everybody involved and engaged in it. I love the idea of the competition that, really gets people excited about looking at their own workspace and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. Fantastic. Simon, let me throw this one to you as well. Law firm leaders at your firm, you thinking differently or leading differently, and you've already had a head start because of the nature of your background as well, I guess, in this.
Perhaps that's helped to sort of to understand things quickly, but I don't think it's made the challenges any less difficult to surmount. Look, I think Dan's given a fantastic summary there. I'd agree with really everything that he said. If I can sort of add maybe a few things to try and just pick up on a few different points. Firstly, I do agree that it's not thinking differently, but there are some different issues and maybe some different emphases perhaps in what AI brings to the challenges to leaders. So sort of one thing in the technology space, there are so many options and it's changing so quickly, and so this need to be agile and try things with uncertainty. It's not a comfortable place for lawyers. We like certainty. We like waterfall methods where we can clearly articulate our requirements and know what we're going to get at the end. And we don't really necessarily have that with AI. We need to be willing to sort of iterate and try multiple things in parallel. Secondly, I think issues around the investment, the return on investment are challenging because we have very little certainty in making investment decisions, and a lot of these solutions are actually very costly. Not just in terms of the outlay to vendors or developers, but also in allocating internal resources to the sort of feasibility and then deployment and adoption of them. And it's quite difficult to predict the returns. And that depends on efficiencies and additional benefits that can be gained, and also potential change in billing models, which we're all grappling with as to how we actually sort of reach ROI on this tech. That then ties into something that Dan spoke about really well, which is the changing the way we operate. So new processes, training, getting people to adopt it, that is hard. And particularly with the amount of change that's happening all at one time. And I think one of the sort of slight differences that I've found in this is that there is a need to think in some ways quite abstractly about the firm, because you sort of think about the skills that AI brings, and that can be quite abstract. So, document Q&A, summarization, data extraction, which parts of the firm do that a lot, and then really to identify the sort of high value use cases. Generating chronologies might be another example. And finally, the final point that I'll make is about risk and compliance. And I think, again, that's a somewhat naturally uncomfortable situation for lawyers, because we have to approach risk sensibly here. And I've certainly spoken to people who have said, well, it makes mistakes and I'm not using it. I've met organisations that have actually banned it for that reason. But that's a very short-term view. I think we could all decide not to use it, but we'd be missing out on a lot of opportunities. And so really the sensible way to approach AI is to acknowledge that it does have risks, but we need to have appropriate mitigations to bring those risks down to an acceptable level.
Yeah, and that is a bit of a mindset shift, isn't it? Because all of our training as lawyers, or for anyone that works in the legal industry, is really identify the problem, identify the problem, identify the problem. Whereas the mindset shift to me is let's identify the opportunities, but be cautious and know that there's problems. And that it seems so small and so simple, but it's fundamental to the way that we approach things. Don't you think, Simon?
I do. I agree with that. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Focus on the upside. How are we going to get there in a safe and responsible way?
Yeah, absolutely. Prue, you started your firm, as you kind of explained at the beginning, really on a very specific and different foundation, almost like a continuous improvement foundation, for want of a better expression. So maybe this question doesn't apply, but did you, in doing that, have to think differently or lead differently from what perhaps you had done in the past?
I mean, I don't know if it's that different either, but I do think it's the same approach, but to a different use case, I guess, or a different challenge. Yeah. I mean, I think I would totally agree with what Dan and Simon have said in terms of the speed and the speed of the change. I think that's quite unique. I mean, we're quite like we've always been quite focused on putting ourselves into the shoes of our clients, and we have our GC network where we, have these monthly calls, and we're really trying to listen to hear what they want, and that's hence we've got this business that helps with climate and cyber and all of the things that the GCs are focused on, that are not necessarily straight legal services. And obviously this is one where it's just kind of suddenly become top of mind for all of these in-house teams. So we are really focused on being relevant and focused on being able to help those guys. But it was I do think the speed is one that's kind of been quite challenging. And at the Law Fest just 2 weeks ago, actually, they Frances Valentine, who's the founder of Academy X here, was talking about shifting from strategic planning, which she says it's pretty much impossible to do in this era, to strategic decisioning. And saying you need to be making these decisions with the best information you have at the time, but actually it's just it's making them as the key, and not like planning actually doesn't work. And I think that kind of that sort of seems on theme with what Dan and Simon were talking about as well. There was another really good analogy. There are 2 good analogies I'll just share from that too. That one was around Nick Abrahams from Norton Rose. He described it as kind of being like a lawyer riding an e-bike versus the old school. And I thought that was kind of a good one. And the other one, though, talking about return on investment and what tools and for what what is the problem we're trying to solve. One of the in-house teams from Les Mills said on our panel too, she's like, well, she said, like, we keep being sold AI and told that we need it, but she said it's kind of like, she's like, it's like having the lawnmower in the garage, but just because everyone else has got one. Like, she's like, this is, I mean, it's slightly different because it's the in-house teams, but she said it is around trying to work out actually what is our pain point, like what is the efficiency we're trying to do here, because I think there's quite a bit of an overwhelm, as Simon listed all the different use cases, to actually being like, so I guess the leadership piece is around like stepping back a little bit and making sure you're actually relevant to what you're trying to solve. Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit more, but again, and if I can draw a thread from something that you've said there, I think it's helpful, again, somewhat trite, but to remember that we're all going through this at the same time. So all of our clients are going through this, all of legal is going through this. There's real opportunities in collaboration and learning, I guess, around all of this in ways that perhaps we haven't seen before. But let me get into business models. And we've touched on this a little bit, but what I'm talking about here is, fundamental rethink of how law firms are structured, from, I guess, governance through billing models. Will kind of get separately into talent, because that's a big thing to unpack there. But how much, or to what extent, are we having to right now, today, reimagine our business models? And Simon, I wanted to direct that question to you first, please.
Yeah, well, firstly, just on the issue of governance and structures, again, I think it's not a fundamental rethink. It's more of an incremental activity. AI really does create a new layer of issues that are unique to AI, but it also affects so many areas where we already have structures and governance in place. And so in a lot of cases, it's more about integration with existing frameworks and governance. So we thought hard about this pretty early on and decided, well, this is going to affect a lot of people in the firm. We could establish some very sort of large governance structures around this, and we decided that we would sort of start fairly light in establishing existing governance, particularly as we needed to be very agile, and we needed people who could work quickly together, make decisions, and be agile. So we sort of have a core AI working group that's involved in most initiatives, and then we have more sort of targeted governance for projects and initiatives that involve the people that need to be involved in those initiatives, rather than sort of everyone being involved in everything. So, for example, when we deployed Lexis Plus AI as a legal research tool mid last year across the firm, we needed a lot of input from the library and the knowledge management teams, as well as legal users. And so we stood up a governance structure sort of specifically around that. For litigation, we have an AI in the courts working group, which is specifically targeted at the use of AI in litigation, because that's really becoming the most sort of regulated from a policy, court policy and so on perspective, and it needs people that are very focused on that. And we have sort of other instances of that around sort of particular problems and opportunity areas within the firm. We may at some stage, I think, create a more holistic AI committee, but I think that will be mostly aimed at increasing adoption and having sort of representation of practice areas and champions across the firm. Coming back to your question then about billing models, look, I think this is early days still, and there's a lot of theory and a lot of discussion about this. And look, we are trying some things. So we've experimented with risk-adjusted pricing, which sort of depends on the level of human review of AI deliverables, and clients have been responsive to that. Now that only works in some practice areas, not in others. So it might work well on a due diligence where a client can decide to take the risk. It's not going to work in litigation where that's just not going to be acceptable to a court. There's obviously a lot of discussion around who gets the benefit of efficiency from AI, whether it's the firm or the client. And I think where this conversation is only about efficiency, then it's going to go to the client, because ultimately competition, I think, will drive that outcome. So I think this comes back to value. And really back to the core of how law firms compete to begin with. And it's really an extension of that we have to differentiate based on the value that we give to clients. And so it's a much more interesting conversation when we start thinking about, well, what IP are we bringing to the way that we use AI or the data that we put into it? How are we creating smarter processes to give more value in less time to the client? And that's really what I think differentiates the ability to charge different fees for AI deliverables. And there's a lot of talk also about how do you then turn that into something that's concrete, and particularly an emphasis on fixed fees. I think that's valid in some cases, but fixed fees are also quite difficult for lawyers, and clients have found it difficult too for a long time, where there's a lot of variables often that are not within the control of the law firm. So AI doesn't solve any of that. Those problems still exist. There's also been talk about sort of a human premium on charge rates. Again, that comes back to that value equation, that you're only going to be able to do that if you can offer the client something that is truly high value in that sort of hybrid model between a lawyer and an AI.
Simon, just staying with the billing model for a moment, and you may not have yet had the opportunity to address this, but how are you thinking about what I'm going to call the knock-on effects of the billable hour effectively being challenged? And by that, I'm thinking about things like how people are compensated, how they're promoted, which has often been based on the number of billable hours, because it's all wrapped within that large envelope of billing models and governance and structures as well. Have you had the opportunity to address any of those things at this point?
Look, we've certainly been thinking about this. There's a lot of over the horizon thinking about what this does to the business of law and our structures, and whether the leverage model still makes sense in the same way. All of those conversations depend on the technology advancing at the sort of trajectory that it's on, and vastly sort of improving from where it's at. Because right now, AI is really not doing that. It's definitely more of an augmentation tool rather than replacing people. And so you sort of can, I suppose, think about what that might look like in the future. And if we do get to more of a narrower pyramid, then yes, that will have some effect on how we're remunerated by clients, and the flow down impact that will have on how we have to remunerate our staff.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, I want to ask you this question as well, because you spoke a little at the beginning about how Landis has really jumped in many respects to AI. How has that, or do you see that impacting your structure, billing models, governance, the same sort of things that we were just chatting about?
Oh, look, my answer is going to be very similar to Simon's answer. I think at this stage, it's not demanding a fundamental rethink of our business model, and I think it's too early to say whether it will longer term as well. We've got an AI lab, which is a sort of collaboration between our tech team and our innovation team. And one of the things that they're working on is an internal AI tool, which is our own and designed to help us drive efficiencies within certain practices within the firm, but also potentially to do sweep of our document management system, so enables us to sort of harness the benefits of that. At the moment, we've rolled out Copilot across the whole firm. I think I might have mentioned that earlier, but Copilot doesn't search our document management system, at least at this stage. And the other sort of governance change we've made in addition to standing up the AI lab is to have an AI steering committee, which sounds similar to one of the committees that Simon was talking about. They're responsible for a broad range of things, including sort of governance and compliance, adoption, but also, which other tools might be a benefit to the firm. I mean, Simon commented before about the fact it's changing so often and so many different tools are coming onto the market and they're not cheap, and where you invest is actually, it's a really tricky decision. And there can be some benefits in going first, but there can also be some benefits in being a fast follower. And I think probably that's where we're sitting. I know that, from the outside world, it looks like we are an early adopter, and I think that's true in some respects, but we're also being sort of measured and sensible about how we, continue to evolve and use AI. In terms of the billing models, we're probably, again, in a very similar situation to Clayton Utz, based on what Simon has said. One of our groups already does value-based or event-based costing, so they're relatively well placed to move forward with AI, subject to clients obviously being on board with that as a move. Increasingly over my time in legal practice, we've moved more and more towards giving fee estimates, which are really quotes, and that's suitable for work that can then be done with AI, because you can do that more efficiently, and hopefully you can drive value both for the firm and for clients. But a large percentage of our firm is, we're largely a litigation firm. We do front-end work as well, but our biggest groups are largely litigious groups. And Simon's 100% right. It's very difficult at the outset of a big litigation to say to the client, it's going to cost this amount of money. And AI, will be able to help with certain parts of that process. And it may be that we move towards a world in which we give, an estimate for this part of the litigation and this part of the litigation and this part, but it will be very step by step. And very hard to do at the outset, because a piece of litigation that takes 2 years can take many different twists and turns. So, so I think that's still at the very early stages of sort of working its way through. And I think there'll be, the industry will sort of sort this out over a period of time, and there will be equalisation, and there'll be some people who take the lead and some fast followers. But it's probably too early to say what that's going to look like. I think we can say with some certainty that all the reducible work, the work that AI is really made for, is document management, contract review and standardization, document classification, legal research. That stuff will increasingly be done by AI and with more confidence. Obviously, at the moment, it can be hit and miss. And the irony there, of course, is that junior lawyers are more often than not the ones who do the legal research. They're not necessarily the ones who can spot something that AI produces and say, well, that's clearly right or clearly wrong, whereas those of us on this call could probably do that. So there's all these sort of teething problems that mean it's not in a position yet for us to, to move forward with confidence and change, position descriptions, roles, governance structures. And we may never get there. We may, but I think law firms are inherently conservative organisations, particularly the larger ones. And I think we would be slow to move to a world in which there are significant changes to the way we sort of structure ourselves.
Yeah. Simon, I've just got a quick question for you on that. Have your in-house teams, do they ask you if you've used AI for pieces of work, or are you required, do you volunteer that?
When we clients through?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you mean in terms of the work when we're producing work for them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think that's a tricky issue, and it's the one issue where I think the law societies are also grappling with that in terms of setting their rules. I think in some cases that makes a lot of sense, where where it's an entire deliverable, then yes, or say we're doing a due diligence and we're using AI to produce that. Absolutely, we would have that conversation, and that's we'd talk about that before we do it. But I think there are also instances where it doesn't really make sense. So, for example, in using AI for legal research, I think it's sort of over the top to expect that we would disclose that, even though we use an AI-generated legal research tool, which we then go and verify by human beings. So we are getting efficiency out of that, but it doesn't really make sense, I think, to need to disclose it. So I think you need to look at the particular case and say, what should we really tell the client about? And there's similar issues, I think, in what's emerging with the courts too, in that there's an expectation in litigation of a high degree of disclosure around that.
And I guess there's always that question on what data is it pulling from, because if it's pulling from your own intellectual property, then that data is your own, in terms of what's being made available to the client as well. So let me jump to the talent question, and I guess looking at the workforce more broadly. And Prue, I wanted to ask this question of you, and perhaps as you've looked at your firm, and that's the extent to which you see AI really impacting the need to reskill, how it's impacting what talent you're attracting, but also the talent that wants to come and work at your firm. And I think we've touched on, if not explicitly discussed, things like AI committees and redefining roles, where perhaps the talent that we would have traditionally drawn on in terms of decision making has now changed or has expanded. So how is all of this changing kind of what we need to know, what the talent needs to know, and the workforce kind of more broadly?
Yeah, I think this kind of question just goes to a big piece of this, which for us is around the education and upskilling, because I think it was Dan talked about earlier, not everyone's at the same place, and some people are going to be really intimidated and others have jumped on. And I do think there's a bit to learn actually from the younger ones who, rightly or wrongly, have probably used it a fair bit in their university degrees when they're coming into the law firms. So there's some sort of AI literacy pieces, but also, then you're having to have that governance around it and the safety around it. So I think there is reconsideration really of the talent structures. So moving away from the more rigid hierarchies to a more multidisciplinary and sort of collaborative teams that blending that legal expertise, but with the data science and tech, because I think everyone's going to bring different things to the table. But I think what we need for the integrity piece is that verification and supervision is going to be key. So I do think that sort of AI council or AI committee piece is going to be quite important as the talent and the education kind of increases and people get more, literate or familiar with it. We're doing an AI course at the moment, our sort of senior leadership team, and he's discussed implementing this sort of AI council, and the council kind of having these guardrails around how you do it, but also I think one of the things that a lot of people grapple with, and this is the in-house teams to even the bigger law firms that I talk to in New Zealand, is where do you how do you educate people? Who are the good providers? And I think, Dan, you've got someone in your firm, as I think you mentioned in a previous call, but I think it's kind of that is a challenge actually about knowing who the good providers are. And people are just learning by doing, but it's kind of everyone's on a pretty different stage of the journey as well. So I think it is, we are prioritising upskilling through structured these training programs and peer learning initiatives like Pass the Prompt and AI education in our CPD program. So we do a range of CPD for our in-house teams and clients. We're really trying to focus on that. And it's sort of the reskilling around the data literacy, the critically assessing the outputs is obviously the key thing as well. But I think that AI will complement those legal professionals where like the talent and the lawyers that we're getting might not fit into the traditional law firm model, but they want to, because they want to work in a different way, but they're really senior lawyers. So we need to also tool them with the education around this as well. So that kind of continuous learning is going to be key for people to retain people, I think, as well. And we do the monthly calls with the sharing and what people are seeing, but I would agree that the speed at which it sort of like from November last year, every in-house team was on a co-pilot trial, and they obviously got the lawyer from the in-house team to be part of that trial. Just 2 weeks ago, that same call, everyone's using something completely different, and I just think that the speed it's fast. So yeah,
I've always thought about the education piece. Now there's kind of that broad education piece around context, which is the agility, it's the change management, it's understanding data, it's all of those things that are critical. Then there's the education piece around the tools, and some of them will be common to everyone, but some of them will be practice area specific. So it's a really broad education.
And I mean, and that's really nice with the way that in-house counsel and the general counsels talked about this about 6 months ago. We were talking about AI, and they were talking about, the AI governance and the rules around what AI tools the business can take on, and the guardrails around the security and privacy and all the things. So there was really it was more around AI governance in terms of the rules that the business were needing to follow when they were procuring, and that's completely changed now to being used in their day-to-day. So
absolutely. I want to get into the change bit and the part that unfortunately often goes with that, which is the burnout bit as well. And Simon, I wanted to address this question to you. We've been talking a lot about the pace of change, needing to be agile, just how quickly really the world around all of us is changing. And there's been that real palpable sense of almost change fatigue. And with that has come some pushback. So how are you managing that at Clayton Utz? How are you kind of getting all this stuff introduced without, really basically overwhelming everybody in the process of trying to use all of this?
I think firstly, most people are pretty excited about the opportunities that AI delivers. I think in terms of what can you do to try and minimise that risk of burnout or being overwhelmed, I think the first and most important thing is to offer something to people that's actually useful to them, that they're excited about, rather than forcing them to use it. And that's partly, that really goes to the sort of adoption conversation about building up some success stories and promoting it in ways that makes people want to use it. Also realising that not everyone is going to adopt it, or is necessarily directly relevant to them. And targeting the people who are going to get the most benefit out of it. For example, I was speaking to a group of partners about a new tool and sort of not quite getting the traction that I was hoping to get. And then so I sent one of my senior associates along to a senior associate retreat, and that got huge demand because that was clearly then speaking to the cohort of people that were actually going to get most benefit out of this. And that was sort of a useful lesson, I think, in targeting the right people. And I think another thing that we can do is sort of make it easy for people and create an environment where they can sort of get the most out of the learning. So, for example, when we introduced legal research into the firm last year, we offered a bunch of online sessions and so on that people could sign up for, and certainly people went to that. But the thing that was really successful was we got the library team to go out and present to each individual team in their own CLEs and with small groups, and they could ask all the questions that they wanted to that perhaps they didn't want to ask in open forum online, and I think that was much more successful and made it quite easy for them to get across it. So thinking through that, I think is another thing you can do.
Yeah, and I suppose gives the sense for everyone that we're all in it together as well, right? If you're with your teammates as well. What about your firm, Dan? Because you spoke earlier about a lot of the education programs that you've got going on, and obviously a lot of initiatives focused on this. How are you dealing with this or is it an issue even at your firm?
It's funny. It's not just AI. I think, the world's in a funny place at the moment, isn't it, with what's going on overseas? And I do think it's something that I've given some thought to, is how do you lead in a time of great uncertainty? And it's not easy. I think, overwhelmingly, we've got an amazing environment at Landers, and we support each other. It's not just a matter of leaders, leading and others following. It's we're all followers and leaders at the same time. One thing that I'm doing, and partly because I'm new to the role as well, is I'm doing a lot of listening. I'm working very agile at the moment. I'm basically hot desking, so I'm sitting in a different group in every week, which is it's a great way to learn, actually. When the chief executive partner moves to a new desk and the tech doesn't work, the service desk tends to move pretty quickly to help. But it's given some great learnings, I think, because when I'm saying, well, we need to make sure that this works in this way, so that, because we're moving eventually to agile work across the firm in our 3 offices. So I'm sort of role modeling that, but learning along the way. So that's given me the opportunity to obviously meet people. We're a big firm, 700 people, so I didn't know everyone. I still don't know everyone. Learning names is not my strong suit, but that's another skill I'm needing to work on. But I'm listening a lot, learning, and just being consistent and visible, I think, is important. And that's not just about AI. That's, as I say, in the moment. And in terms of the AI piece, look, I've spoken about sort of trying to democratise it and bring everyone along on that journey. And education is the key, I think, as Simon has said as well. So we've done, our tech team have been very good at producing short bite-sized videos, so sort of 20-minute videos where they teach people how to prompt. This was probably 6 months ago now, when it was all a bit new and Copilot was just coming. I think another thing that's been really successful is having champions in each group, in each office. So people who are the go-to person, who've been early adopters of the tech and can teach others. Many lawyers are frustrated teachers. And so if you give them something that they can teach and they're good at, they take quite a lot of joy and enjoyment in bringing others along on that journey. So that's been important as well. So I think all of those little things are things that we can do. But Adel, Simon's also right. It is exciting. I mean, some of our team, particularly those who are keen to learn, are excited about the opportunities it can bring. So it's just sort of, managing all of that and people moving at different paces. I think that's probably the challenge. And then having a vision of what it looks like in 5 years' time. I think that's the thing that I'm really struggling with, is none of us really know. And so, trying to set firm strategy and understand where we're going to be in 2030 is challenging, because this is a fairly significant disruption that's happening to the sector. So, balancing all of that is not easy.
If you figure out the 2030 thing, Dan, we'll get you back, because you can tell us all about that.
I haven't. I don't think I'm going to be honest, but I'll do my best.
Prue, how about you? How do you keep the change, the continuous improvement going without losing everyone in between?
Oh, we're trying our best, but it is hard with us being a remote model too, where our lawyers are on secondments fundamentally, and the in-house team. So I think that touch point and the community piece has always been a core part of what we're trying to create. So hearing from people what they're doing is that's kind of the key to it, as well as kind of the introducing it, embedding it, but also trying to make sure people aren't feeling overwhelmed, and also going into secondments feeling like they can navigate some of this as well. I mean, it's, as I said, there's just such different stages that people are at as well. Where I guess it's about ensuring that smooth transition too, and acknowledging some that are reluctant and treating them differently as well. We've had Caroline Ferguson join us just last year, our COO, and she's from a bigger firm, Simpson Gresson, and she's kind of come with a really strong tech and innovation background. So having her on the team, for me, we're so lucky to have her, but she's very much across this space. So is really helping the clients and the team too, in terms of encouraging us to, get on board with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, we spoke about AI kind of being a bit of a leveler, leveling the playing field, if you like, and which is great, because everybody kind of gets to work at a similar level and a similar pace. But it's also brought about a bunch of other things, like the democratisation of legal knowledge and making all legal services and products and solutions more accessible, I guess. So in that environment where we've got a great leveler going on and we're all kind of learning the same things at the same time, then I'm wondering how law firms can stand out or create or even sustain a unique value proposition.
Yeah, I think the starting point for answering this question is to acknowledge that there are still lots of things that AI cannot do and probably will never be able to do. It's obviously brilliant at finding patterns, but it's not great with context and should never be used for, an irreducible process, one that creates that requires nuanced or creative thinking or human judgment. And so there will always be work for lawyers to do, and there'll always be work for law firms to do. I think, I said right at the start when I was introducing myself and the firm, we've always prided ourselves on being humanistic and providing advice in a really empathetic way, deep understanding of our clients and their problems and care for how we help them manage that. And I think for us, what we would like to do is sort of double down on that as an approach. It's being more human, almost in the face or with the assistance of the AI technology. And so for us, that's about maintaining a great employee value proposition. So our employees enjoy working here. We've just done our engagement result survey, and consistently our results are very good. 96% of our people said they were proud to work at Landron Rogers, and our engagement score of 84% was 15% above the national average. So maintaining that is going to be really important, and making sure it's a great place to work. If we keep our people happy and engaged, then they'll provide better service to our clients. So doubling down on our employee value proposition, which then extends to doubling down on our client value proposition and just staying really close to our clients and answering and attending to their needs. So it boils then down to human relationships with our people, and then human relationships with our clients. So that's what I would like to think will continue to differentiate us. I mean, look, at the end of the day, law firms are fundamentally pretty similar beasts. There are some subtle differences though, and the way that they're structured can make a difference to that. And internally, I think we understand what our strengths are, and we hope, because I say hope because we can have a plan, but as I say, AI, what it looks like in 5 years, we don't know. We hope that will continue to set us apart over the next little while.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you, Prue, is it the human bits within and for the human bits outside, that connection being critical?
So, I mean, it's about the expertise and the strategic insights. I mean, our model is really senior lawyers, so I think it's for us, the market differentiation piece is, in a way, it's around exactly what we're doing now, which is around helping a client navigate change, the stakeholder management, the relationship building within a business outside of the legal, the in-house legal team, going in and being able to establish relationships really quickly and establish trust. I think it's doing all of that. But obviously AI being an enabler to some of that as well, and being able to do it quicker possibly as well. But I do think a lot of our GCs and our in-house teams have told us that there's the increasingly common bush lawyers with the business going and running things through, and so you're getting draft documents or responses that you wouldn't usually expect, but being really respectful of that as well, but also but then adding value on top of it, right? And that's the piece, because I think that is where our skills come to bear, and not being discouraging it, using it, but just being able to still add that value piece and asking the right questions. So I think while it's leveling the playing field, it is around that client experience and value set, and sort of living that, and the clients will continue to value, and it's almost not sticking to your knitting, but kind of what are we really good at? It is that really senior, valuable, trusted advisor, and continuing to do that. Yeah.
I mean, I want to ask the same question of you, and feel free to answer that. But I wanted to add a little bit in that has come through from Dan and from Prue's responses, which is, do we also, in terms of our differentiation, need to think about how we message our services differently? Like, do we need to double down on that human bit and be speaking to that more so than perhaps the other more clinical things, in a way, that we've tended to use in terms of how we message our services and solutions and products?
Yes, well, again, this all comes back to value. So it does require sort of going to the core of that and saying, well, what do we really give to clients that they find valuable? And I absolutely agree with that emphasis on the human side of it. That's always going to remain really important. And speaking to a large AI vendor yesterday, and they were talking about a human premium in the billing model, and you know, that was sort of their vision of how value would be sort of captured in the billing model. But it does go to that, the quality of the experience and the judgment and the, you know, emotional intelligence and all those things that humans do so well in the way that legal services are provided. I think there's some other things in this conversation too. There's IP, and I think that's one that has a way to go, but I still think, you know, that's at the core of many firms' models. You know, we have many years of documents that have been created by the top experts in particular areas, and each firm sort of has their niche and so on. And you can sort of see a world where firms compete by saying, well, our AI is smarter than their AI, because we've got all of the context, you know, to feed to the AI to produce it. And, you know, drafting documents still requires having great documents to give to the AI. And so AI drafting is really around the edges. You still need that sort of core of IP to give to it. So I think that's still going to be an important differentiator. Smarter process improvement around how we sort of effectively build it into our workflows, people who can use it most effectively, and an entrepreneurial approach to billing models where there's sort of new ways of thinking about risk and value in the pricing. All of those, I think, are opportunities for lawyers to differentiate themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, sadly, we've only got a few minutes left, so I do need to start to wrap, but I wanted to do that by looking at kind of an AI maturity scale. So giving folks kind of a bit of a benchmark. And the scale I'm going to use is 1 being you're just starting with AI in your law firm, 3 is you're experimenting, and 5 is you're an AI-enabled machine. So you've really kind of got to the end of the race. So looking at the next 12 months, so Dan, I'm not going 5 years, just 12 months, looking at the next 12 months, where do you think law firms need to be on that scale? And when will they know that they've got there? Simon, the question is for you first.
Look, I think where we need to be is sort of a 3 to a 4. But that's going to be different for different areas. I think, you know, we'll sort of progressively deploy solutions, and so we'll be at different levels of maturity in different practice areas and functions within the firm, but broadly moving from experimentation to adoption on at least key things. How will we know when we're there? Well, I think a litmus test will be that we'll stop talking about it. You know, I've been around sort of long enough in the tech space to see what happens when, you know, digital disruption comes through from megatrends. And, you know, we're not all the time talking about the disruption of email or the web or social media or mobile. They've all become BAU to our practice. And I think AI will become that. And that's going to take a while. But the reason we'll stop talking about it all the time, and some things haven't, like cyber, we're still all very worried about that because we haven't really solved that yet, at least in the way that we're all comfortable with. But I think over time we'll resolve the challenges, we'll identify the patterns, you know, we'll sort of transform things that need to be transformed, or at least we'll understand how to approach them. And you know, that'll be the sign, I think, of them becoming more into BAU.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, how about you? Where do you think we're going to be 12 months or need to be on the scale, and how will we know?
Yeah, look, Simon's answer is pretty much my answer, to be honest. I was going to say 3 to 4 as well. And the only thing I'll probably add is, and again, not being an expert in this space, is my sense is that there's just so much change and so many new things coming out. You know, it's almost like putting the finger in the dike, isn't it? In terms of you plug that hole and then a new one emerges, but perhaps it's a new opportunity. So I suppose I don't think we'll have a sense in 12 months. Well, we won't know. I don't think that we're there, because I think we'll continue. I think the pace of change will continue to potentially even accelerate. And so that's my only caveat on that. Otherwise, I completely agree with everything Simon said.
Yeah, the world of continuous improvement, we never actually reach the end. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Absolutely, for better or for worse.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to stop talking about this in 12 months. I think it's going to be going for longer than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Prue, the last word is yours.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, with Dan and Simon, I was thinking 3 to 4 as well. I think you can't do a wait and see mindset, but I think, yeah, the culture of learning, lawyers feeling confident using it ethically and strategically is going to be a positive sign, but I think it's just going to be still moving really, really fast still.
Yeah, and I guess, look, the problem with the wait and see is that at some point in time, it's just going to be too hard to catch up, right?
Yeah.
That's the reality as well. So fantastic discussion, Simon, Dan, Prue, thank you so much. Really enjoyed that. And, you know, I'm compelled to check in with you again in 12 months. So watch this space and we'll come back and revisit it. But for now, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks so much.